Imagine this for a second. You've just parked your truck, maybe it's your workhorse, a Chevy Silverado HD, end of a long day.
Right.
And then you get this message. Urgent. Says park it outside. Like, right now, away from buildings.
That's an alarming message to get. Immediately makes you think fire risk.
Exactly. What on earth is going on? It's not just a check engine light. This is pretty dramatic.
It really is.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into something pretty significant in the auto world. GM, General Motors, they've just recalled over 62,000 Chevrolet Silverado medium-duty trucks.
That's a lot of trucks. Heavy-duty ones, too.
Yeah, the 4500 HD, 5500 HD, 6500 HD. And this isn't just, a minor glitch. We're looking at manufacturing, safety, the whole complex web of how vehicles get made.
And what's really interesting, as you said, it's not just a single faulty part appearing out of nowhere. We're going to explore the immediate danger, of course, that fire risk is key, but we also want to connect the dots for you. Show how these problems actually surface, the sometimes surprising history behind this specific issue, because it's not entirely new.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we'll get into that. And what it all means for you, whether you drive one of these or just rely on vehicles, which is, let's face it, most of us.
Absolutely. And we've got some really solid, up-to-the-minute information for this. Our source is an article from Automotive Dive, published literally today, June 27th, 2025.
Super timely.
Written by Eric Walls. Seems like he's right on top of this breaking story. So, we've got the latest details. Let's jump in.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the immediate concern. Let's hit the basic facts first. What? Over 62,000 trucks, as we said. Those specific models, 4500 HD, 5500 HD, 6500 HD.
Right, the medium-duty work trucks.
And the production window is pretty wide, isn't it?
Yeah.
May 2018 all the way through September 2024.
Yeah, that's more than 6 years of production. That's significant.
And that warning. Park outdoors, away from structures. Why so specific? I mean, that sounds like they're really worried about fire spreading, not just happening in the truck.
That's exactly it. That level of specific instruction points to a perceived immediate and severe threat. They're concerned about the potential for the fire to damage buildings or, worse.
Okay, so what's actually failing? What's the defect here?
So the core problem is in a part called the brake pressure sensor assembly.
Brake pressure sensor. Okay.
Yeah. Basically, its job is to monitor the hydraulic fluid pressure inside your brake system. Really important data for braking, stability control, all that stuff.
Makes sense.
The failure mode here is that this assembly can leak. Hydraulic fluid can actually seep into the brake pressure switch.
Okay, and fluid getting into an electrical switch sounds bad.
It is very bad. Brake fluid, while gasoline, can be flammable under the right conditions, and it can also conduct electricity where it shouldn't. So when that fluid gets into the switch, it creates a pathway for electricity to go wrong, an electrical short.
Right. Short circuit. Heat.
Exactly. The short generates heat. And if you've got heat plus brake fluid...
Potential fire.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is it leaking? What's the root cause they've identified?
This is where it gets into the nitty-gritty of materials. The recall report points the finger at the rubber diaphragm seal inside that pressure sensor.
A little rubber seal.
A little, but critical rubber seal. It turns out the supplier used an unauthorized chemical when making the rubber for this diaphragm.
Unauthorized, so not part of the spec GM provided.
Precisely. And this chemical, over time, reacts badly with the brake fluid. It causes the rubber to degrade, to break down.
So the seal just fails.
Essentially, yes. It loses its integrity, and then the brake fluid can leak past it, right into the electrical parts, the switch, the wiring harness.
And boom, potential fire hazard. Wow. All from the wrong chemical in the rubber.
It highlights how critical material science and supply chain control are. The supplier named is an Illinois company, Kodiak Controls Inc. They're the Tier 1 supplier, meaning they deliver this part directly to GM.
Okay, and they estimate about 1% of these recalled trucks actually have the defect. Which, 1% sounds small.
But it's not insignificant when you apply it to the total number.
Right, 1% of over 62,000. That's still over 600 trucks out there with this potential ticking time bomb.
Exactly. For those owners, the risk isn't 1%, it feels like 100%. It really underscores why that park outdoors warning is so vital.
No kidding. So what's the fix? What's GM doing for these owners?
GM dealers will replace the brake pressure switch wire harness, and importantly, this will be free of charge.
Okay, good. No cost to the owner.
Correct. Now, in terms of timing, owners should expect to get letters starting around July 28th. but it's kind of a two-stage thing.
How so?
The first letter will basically be the warning. Here's the risk. Park outside. Be careful. Then a second letter will go out once the actual replacement parts are available in sufficient quantity for dealers to do the repairs.
Ah, okay. So the warning comes first, then the notification that the fix is ready. Makes sense given the scale.
Exactly. There's the immediate safety notification, then the logistics of getting, 62,000 plus parts manufactured and distributed.
So action plan for owners. Heed the warning. Watch the mailbox.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier, this isn't entirely new. This is where the story gets more complex, right?
It really does. This isn't the first time GM has wrestled with brake pressure sensor issues on these Silverados. Believe it or not, this is the second recall for some of these trucks, specifically the 2019 to 2023 models, involving this very component.
Wait, a second recall on the same part for some trucks?
Well, related issue. It highlights how persistent these problems can sometimes be. GM actually started investigating brake fluid leaks in these trucks almost 3 years ago.
3 years, wow. So this has been bubbling under the surface for a while.
It seems so. The first investigation kicked off back in August 2022.
Okay, so let's unpack that first recall. April 2023, you said. What was different then?
Right. So back then, the supplier was different. It was Navistar, not Kodiak Controls. And the pressure sensor they supplied also developed fluid leaks, but for a slightly different reason.
Okay, different supplier, different root cause, but still leaking sensors.
Exactly. The trigger for that investigation was serious. A claim of an actual vehicle fire on a 2019 Silverado medium-duty truck.
An actual fire. Okay, that gets attention fast.
You bet. So GM worked with Navistar. They dug into field data, warranty claims, looked at returned parts. Standard procedure, but crucial.
And what did they find in those returned parts?
They found a return sensor and its wiring harness that showed clear signs of heat damage, overheating.
Okay.
So they did X-ray scans.
Yeah.
And those scans confirmed brake fluid was getting past the diaphragm seal in that sensor, leaking into the switch, the harness, even the fuse circuit.
So a similar leak path, just a different initial failure.
Correct. And the consequence they identified then was also alarming. The leak could cause the brake assist pump to turn on by itself even when you weren't braking.
The pump just running.
Yeah, running unintentionally. And that continuous running generates a lot of heat. Excessive heat. Which, again, could potentially lead to an underhood fire.
Different mechanism, same scary outcome. Did they pinpoint the exact cause for that leak?
They did. By February 2023, their analysis concluded it was caused by delamination of corrosion-inhibiting sealant. Basically, a protective coating inside the sensor was peeling off, allowing the fluid to seep through.
Fascinating. A sealant failure that time.
Mm-hmm. And that led to the first recall, April 6, 2023. Over 40,000 Silverado trucks.
40,000. And were there reports of fires or smoke with that one too?
Yes. At the time of that recall, GM knew of 21 potentially related complaints, and some of those did specifically mention fire, smoke, or visible flames. So the fire risk pattern was definitely there early on.
Okay, this is really painting a picture.
Yeah.
So connecting that to today, you mentioned a double whammy.
Yes, and this is crucial for some owners. Some of the trucks included in this current recall, the one involving Kodiak Controls, were already fixed under the first recall, the Navistar one from April 2023.
Oh, no. So owners thought they were safe, but now they need another repair for basically the same component area.
Exactly. A second repair for a different but related fault. You can imagine the frustration. It really underscores the complexity of these supply chains. You fix one issue tied to one supplier's process,
and another pops up from a different supplier, affecting the same system.
Precisely. It shows how deeply these material or process issues can be embedded and how hard it can be to root them all out across different suppliers and different production years.
That's tough. So if the first recall was triggered by a fire claim, how did GM figure out this new Kodiak Controls problem? What was the trigger this time? Especially since the symptoms sound similar.
That's a key part of the story, and it really highlights the importance of internal safety reporting. The turning point came on October 11th, 2024.
Okay, what happened then?
GM found another case of that unintended brake pump activation, but this time it was on a 2023 Silverado.
A newer truck.
A newer truck, yes. And critically, how it was reported, it came through GM's internal Speak Up for Safety program.
Speak Up for Safety. Tell me about that.
It's basically a dedicated channel for any employee engineer, line worker, anyone to report a safety concern they see without fear of penalty. It's designed to catch things that might otherwise slip through the cracks.
That sounds incredibly valuable. So an employee flagged this.
It appears so.
Yeah.
And what made this specific 2023 truck significant was that it wasn't part of the first recall. It actually had what GM thought was an improved sensor, designed specifically to prevent that sealant delamination problem from the Navistar parts.
Ah, so the fix wasn't working, or rather, a new problem was appearing despite the improved design.
Exactly. The symptom was the same unintended pump activation, but the truck should have been immune to the known cause. That immediately raised a red flag. GM opened a new investigation in November 2024.
And what did they find initially?
They found the telltale sign again, brake fluid in the sensor wiring harness of this improved sensor.
Okay, so the internal report was critical. What came next? More field reports.
Yes. Another big piece of the puzzle landed on December 18th, 2024. GM got a third field report. And this one was also highly significant.
Why this one?
Because it involved a 2021 Silverado that had already been repaired under the April 2023 recall.
Wow, so a truck that got the first fix was still having the problem.
Or rather, exhibiting symptoms of this problem. Again, they found brake fluid in the harness. This really solidified the theory that they were dealing with a second distinct defect separate from the Navistar sealant issue.
Okay, the field evidence is mounting. But how did they get from fluid in the harness on these trucks to pinpointing an unauthorized chemical in the rubber diaphragm from Kodiak Controls? That sounds like serious detective work.
It absolutely is. You can't just look at it and see that. That required specialized scientific analysis. So on March 3rd, 2025, GM and International Motors brought in the experts.
Outside help.
Yes, they contracted the Akron Rubber Development Laboratory. These guys are specialists in rubber, polymers, how materials fail.
Okay, send the parts to the lab.
Exactly. The lab tested the diaphragms from these failing sensors, and their findings were definitive. They confirmed the rubber was degrading. And crucially, they identified why. It was degradation caused by the use of unauthorized chemicals in the rubber compound by the supplier, Kodiak Controls. These chemicals reacted with the brake fluid over time, destroying the seal's integrity.
There it is, the smoking gun identified by the lab, unauthorized chemicals.
Precisely. It clearly separated this issue from the earlier sealant delamination problem and pointed directly to a supplier process issue.
Incredible detail.
Okay.
So they have the lab confirmation. What were the final steps leading up to the recall announcement we saw today?
With the root cause confirmed, GM went back and looked at all the field data again. In April 2025, they updated their analysis. Between November 2024 and April 2025, they had about 160 potentially related field reports.
And any fires in that batch?
They identified one alleged fire incident within that group. GM inspected that vehicle and concluded the fire was likely related to these brake fluid leaks stemming from the Kodiak Controls defect.
Okay.
So you have the internal report from Speak Up for Safety. You have the repeated field failures on trucks that should have been okay. You have the definitive lab confirmation of the unauthorized chemical.
All the pieces lined up?
All the pieces. And that led GM's internal safety field action decision authority to authorize this current safety recall on June 5th, 2025.
Got it. And just to clarify, while there was that one alleged fire linked later, GM isn't aware of accidents or injuries specifically from this Kodiak Controls issue, right?
That's what the report indicates, yes. No known accidents or injuries tied specifically to this defect, which is distinct from any incidents potentially related to the first recall.
Okay, so stepping back from the specifics of this recall, what does this whole saga really mean for you, the listener? Why should someone who doesn't own a Silverado HD care about this?
Well, it's a fantastic, if concerning, case study in several things. First, the sheer complexity of modern vehicles. It's mind-boggling, really.
Yeah.
A tiny rubber diaphragm deep inside a sensor, made with the wrong chemical by a supplier, and it can lead to a major fire risk across tens of thousands of vehicles. It shows how interconnected everything is.
And the importance of materials, right? Stuff we never even think about.
Absolutely. Material science is critical. The interaction between that rubber, those specific chemicals, the brake fluid, it's all happening at a microscopic level, but with huge real-world safety consequences.
It also really shines a light on supply chain quality control, doesn't it?
It really does. A Tier 1 supplier, Kodiak Controls in this case, apparently deviated from the material specifications. It raises questions about how automakers ensure quality not just from their direct suppliers, but maybe even their suppliers, the whole chain.
Yeah, how deep does that oversight go?
Yeah, that's the question. And then there's the role of regulators like NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and these internal programs like GM Speak Up for Safety.
Mm.
This whole discovery process, from initial claims to the internal report, the lab tests, it shows how these different layers work together, ideally, to catch problems and enforce accountability. It's a safety net, even if it sometimes takes time to work.
It's a complex dance between the company, its suppliers, its employees, and the regulators.
It really is.
And for us as consumers, what are the takeaways? It definitely reinforces the need for vigilance, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Staying informed about recalls, even for vehicles you don't own, helps you understand the landscape. You see how safety issues are found and fixed, or sometimes how they recur. It impacts the whole industry.
And it touches on trust, too. Trust in the manufacturers, trust in the parts. Incidents like this can shake that.
They certainly can. Consumers have a right to expect that the components in their vehicles are made to spec and are safe. When that breaks down, especially repeatedly on a related issue, it raises legitimate questions.
It also highlights that vehicle safety isn't a one-time thing. It's not like they design it, build it, and it's done.
Not at all. This proves it's a continuous cycle. Design, test, produce, monitor what's happening in the field through warranty data, field reports, those internal safety programs, and then correct when necessary. Like with this recall, it's constantly evolving.
And just for clarity, you mentioned some trucks aren't affected. Who is definitely out of the woods on this specific recall?
Right. Good point. Two main groups. First, Silverado trucks built before the 2019 model year. They use a different brake pressure sensor design altogether.
Okay, older design, not impacted.
Correct. And second, newer trucks that were built with a specific type of brake switch wire harness, one that already uses a silicone sealant designed to prevent fluid leaks.
Ah, so GM had already implemented a design fix on some harnesses, likely learning from the earlier issues.
It seems that way. Those specific design choices using that sealant apparently mitigate this particular failure mode, so trucks equipped with those harnesses are not included in this recall.
Okay, that's useful context. So we've really dug into this GM Silverado recall. We've seen the immediate issue, the fire risk, the specific defect involving Kodiak Controls and that unauthorized chemical. And we've traced the history back, the earlier recall of Navistar, the sealant issue, the overlapping problems, and how this new defect was uncovered through internal reporting and detailed lab work.
Yeah, quite a journey from a tiny rubber seal to a 62,000 vehicle recall.
It really is. It highlights the complexity, the vulnerabilities, but also the systems in place trying to catch these things.
Which leads to, I think, a bigger question, maybe something for you to think about. In this world we live in now, with incredibly complex machines, global supply chains stretching everywhere, how do we strike the right balance?
Balance between what?
Between the constant push for innovation, for making things faster, cheaper, better, and the absolute need for safety and reliability. You know, what level of risk are we unknowingly accepting? Like this unauthorized chemical, how often do similar things happen in products we use every day without us ever knowing?
That's a chilling thought.
And it highlights the role of those whistleblowers, those internal reporting systems. How crucial are they really in catching the things that the standard processes might miss? Are they the ultimate backstop for safety in these complex systems?
Definitely something to mull over. How much relies on someone inside noticing something isn't quite right and having the courage and the mechanism to speak up?
Exactly.
Well, we hope this deep dive gave you a much clearer picture, not just of this specific GM recall, but hopefully a better appreciation for all the intricate layers involved in manufacturing, safety, and keeping the vehicles we depend on running properly.
Yeah, there's always more beneath the surface than just the headline.